Our series is Potential, and the next several weeks we're going to be talking about the relationships that can change the way that we view ourselves, the way we view others, and even the way we see God. There are a lot of relationships, honestly, that you're going to have over the course of your life. You have family relationships, you have friend relationships, but specifically over the next several weeks, we're talking about romantic relationships. Few relationships have the power to shape your future as much as the romantic relationships that you pursue. And so this is an important topic for us to talk about. And of course, last week we unpacked the idea that ultimately, especially if we're followers of Jesus, the purpose of those relationships is to glorify and to honor God. Now, here's the thing. Maybe you don't call the romantic relationships in your life dating. Maybe you don't want to put a label on it. Maybe you're trying to convince all your peers that you really are just friends. But however you would label it, what we're talking about in this series is the relationships where the other person means more to you than just being a good or close or best friend. So how do those relationships happen? Maybe this is a better question. How do we do those relationships well? How do you date well? Maybe you'd say, honestly, I'm currently dating. I'm really good at it. I'm dating multiple people. I don't know. That might not be the best. Maybe you'd say, hey, I know what I'm doing. Maybe you'd say, well, I'm interested in dating, but I don't know. I'm just kind of, I'm looking for someone, but I can't really find anybody. I'm just not quite there yet. Maybe for you, you'd say, honestly, Jesse, I'm not even interested in dating. So I can kind of check out during this series. Here's the thing. Regardless of where you find yourself, I really think that what we're talking about today will help you in the long run to build a healthy relationship, especially when it comes to the romantic relationships that you build. Now, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been on your way to do something and you suddenly found out that you weren't prepared? The time that I think of when I ask that question, it was like upper elementary school. And I remember walking into school and looking around, and some of the kids in my class had shoe boxes under their arms. And I was like, that's sort of weird that they would bring a shoe box to school today. But, I just shrugged it off because I was like, okay, maybe I don't know, maybe they just have new shoes that they're doing for show and tell or something. I don't know. And so then I get into the classroom and I see all these kids, like my peers, they're going over and they're setting up on the far side of the classroom. There's this like long counter and they're setting up these shoeboxes. They're opening it up and showing these like little dioramas of animals and stuff. It's suddenly just like a brick. It hit me. There was a diorama we were supposed to work on. I didn't have it with me. Not only that, I had not begun to work on it at home. It was, I don't know, I think mine was about penguins or something, but I hadn't even begun to work on it. And I remember walking into the situation feeling so totally unprepared all of a sudden. It's the worst feeling. And again, I don't know if this is true for you. Maybe it's just true for me because I can struggle with anxiety. But I will still have nightmares where I'm in class and I forgot about a test or a final that's supposed to be happening that day and I didn't study it at all. And I'm totally underprepared. And here's the thing. I hate walking into situations that are unprepared. But the truth is, when it comes to romantic relationships, especially the way I handled them when I was in high school, a lot of times I kind of stumbled into them and I found out I wasn't nearly as prepared as I wanted to be. Now, we talked about this last week. The Bible doesn't necessarily specifically talk about dating, right? There wasn't dating in the Bible. You would just give cattle to someone and then that's what you did instead of an engagement ring, okay? It's kind of not culturally relevant to us. But we did talk about last week, ultimately, God does have something to say about our relationships, and he does have something to say about how we build those relationships. So I want to take you to maybe a surprising verse at first. It's a book of Proverbs, chapter 24. If you're familiar with the book of Proverbs, King Solomon wrote it. He had incredible wisdom from God. He writes out these just simple sayings that we can use. And a lot of times Proverbs follows this sort of model. Hey, if you do this, this will happen. If you see this in life, this is what it's causing, right? And this is what he says, Proverbs 24, verse 27. It says this. It says, put your outdoor work in order and get your fields ready. After that, build your house. You might be looking at that and say, Jesse, I thought we were talking about relationships. You're talking about building projects. And it's true, but just give me a second here. If you've been around New Spring any length of time, you know that we have built a lot of buildings here. In fact, I have a blueprint of one of our additions that I actually got to be involved with. And here's the thing. I have seen a lot of buildings built here. And what's interesting is every time I've seen us build a building, it actually kind of starts with us tearing things down. We prepare the land first. We would clear out the things that used to be there. We would clear the land. And then, after a good foundation had been built, we build a strong and stable building. And that's what Solomon is talking about here. He's saying, hey, before you go and build your strong, stable house, you need to clear the land. You need to prepare for it. The same is true for strong and stable relationships. Because here's the truth. Who you date might wind up being temporary, but who you become is lasting. Can I say that again? Who you date might be temporary. Maybe the first person you date will end up being the only person you date. And that's great. But it might be temporary. But here's the thing. Who you become is lasting. The choices that you are making right now are laying a foundation that you will build your character on, your faith on, and that foundation is going to impact the choices that you are going to choose to make. So, when it comes to our relationships, what kind of blueprint do you have to make sure that you build strong and stable ones? If I had to pick a blueprint for romantic relationships, I think I would go to the chapter that honestly we call the love chapter. It gives us a great blueprint for love. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This is a verse that we've read many times in Thrive. In fact, one of the exercises that I have for you to do, I know we specifically did back in our family series, but I think it's so important that we go here because so often in high school, we wonder who will date first, we wonder when we'll date first, and we don't question, are we ready to build on a strong foundation? 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is Paul, again, we talked about this last week. 1 Corinthians is a letter that Paul writes to a church in Corinth. The church in Corinth had a lot of the culture in Corinth, rather, had a lot of strange ideas about God, about sex, about sexuality. And so Paul writes to this church, and he has to correct several things. He talks about how whatever we do, we should honor God. We should glorify God with what we do, right? And ultimately, we did talk about this last week. If God is the creator and designer of sex, and he's the creator and designer of us, he gets a vote on how we build those things, right? I mean, the scripture is clear that when it comes to sex, it takes place between a man and a woman in the context of a marriage, right? That's God's plan. But if we're just talking about the dating relationships that build up to that, what does it look like? I want to take you to chapter 13 because in this, Paul unpacks love. And again, not the love that our culture talks about. A lot of times when culture talks about love, it's a euphemism for sex. But love is so much deeper than that. It's not just attraction. Like it's not seeing someone and saying, "Oh, we just fell in love." It's not infatuation. Love is deeper than that. The love that this is talking about. This is talking about as followers of Jesus, the love that we should have because we've experienced it from God, right? Chapter 13 says this, and starting in verse 4, it says, "Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wrong. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always hopeful and endures through every circumstance." Notice again, it doesn't say anything about what we hear from culture of falling in love or the infatuation. "Oh, I just couldn't take my eyes off her. She was so beautiful." Or, "Oh, he's just so sensitive. He always listens to me." No. It's more than that. And here's the thing. If we took where these verses say love and we put blanks there and we put in people's name, I'm sure you would all say, "I want to find someone that is patient and kind. I want to find someone that's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. I want to find someone that doesn't demand their own way." And that's fine. It's important that we do find and look for people like that. But more important, remember where we started. It's not that we find someone like that. It's that we become someone like that. Again, we want to choose who you want to work on becoming. Let me say that again. You have a choice on who you work on becoming. A lot of times we think that we are out of the box the way that we are. But the truth is, we talked about this last week in the theme verse for this series. God wants to transform us into a new person by changing the way we think. He wants us to think the way He does about things. And so what does that mean? Well, it means when it comes to relationships, if we want to build strong, stable relationships, one, we should choose who we want to work on becoming, right? Use this as a blueprint for yourself. Before you worry about who you're dating, ask yourself, who are you becoming? Can you say, if you go through these verses, Jesse is patient, Jesse is kind? Can you go through these verses and say, Jesse is not boastful or proud? Jesse he's not irritable. He doesn't demand his own way. He keeps no record of being wrong. Jesse does not rejoice about injustice. Rather, he rejoices when the truth wins out. Jesse never gives up. Jesse never loses faith. Jesse is always hopeful. Jesse endures through every circumstance. See, I want those things to be true about myself, and so I need to practice making them true about myself. I need to invite God into the process of making those true about myself. Because again, who you date might end up being temporary, but who you become is lasting. Now, here's the thing. This is counterintuitive, right? You probably know someone at your school, maybe it was a close friend, that started dating someone, and all of a sudden, everything about that person changed. Who they hung out with, what their interests were. They changed because of who they aligned themselves with. And that is an example of someone building a house on a very shaky foundation. Rather than doing that, let's be different than that. Remember our theme verse, the one I hope you memorize this series. Don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Before you worry about who you're going to date, worry about who you are going to become. And as you work on that and as you practice that, you will see what God's will is for you. Remember how this verse ends. You will learn to know God's will for you, which is good, and it is pleasing, and it is perfect. That's our hope for you in relationships, that you can work on a blueprint that will be lasting and will lead to strong, stable relationships that'll stand the test of time.